Creating users and groups is typically one of the first steps to building up a Spider Impact environment. I typically start with groups. To add a group, I'll select Administration in the bottom left, and then select Groups and Permissions under Users and Groups. I can see all the groups that have been added to my environment. Although not required, I've decided to create one group for each of the group types: Power Users, Update Users, Interactive Users, and View Only. I'll select the Power Users group and see that the group type, not surprisingly, was set to Power Users. Because that was set, when I click on Advanced, I'll see the maximum list of permissions allowed. For Power Users, there are many permissions that can either all be selected, all be unselected, or just a percentage allowed. If this was a group that contained all admin users, these permissions would be what I'd recommend, with all permissions allowed. However, if this was a group that contained users that were not administrators, I would need to be a bit more selective. The first section I'd likely remove is the super administration rights in the bottom right, simply by deselecting the top box there. I would also take the time to think through each of these other options more carefully. One that I'll highlight is an important option in the top left: View All Organizations. If this permission is granted, I'll have access to all the organizations in the environment. If it is not granted, I need to be granted access to each organization manually. I'll provide an example of that in a minute. For now, I'll restore all the permissions for this group by selecting Cancel and move on to Organization. Notice that the selected organization section is blank. Even though it's blank, I have access to all the orgs in my environment. I'll just demonstrate that quickly by selecting another tab and selecting the drop-down at the top. I can see the Mobile World and Demos orgs. Going back to the other tab, I'll select Cancel. I'll move on to the Update Users group and see that the group type was set to Update Users. Because that was set, when I click on Advanced, I'll see the maximum list of permissions allowed for this group is less than half of those for Power Users. Notice that for this group, the View All Organizations permission was unchecked. If I cancel and select Organization, I'll see that I needed to apply the orgs that I wanted this group to see, in this case Mobile World and Demos. I'll select Cancel and select the Interactive Users group. I see that the group type was set to Interactive Users, and because that was set, when I click on Advanced, I'll see the maximum list of permissions allowed for this group is only a handful. Notice that for this group, the View All Organizations permission was checked because it contains members of our executive team who have access to all orgs. I'll cancel and select the View Only group, and see the group type was set to View Only. Because that was set, when I click on Advanced, I'll see the maximum list of permissions allowed for this group is only 2. Notice that for this group, the View All Organizations permission was unchecked. If I cancel and select Organization, I'll see that I needed to apply the orgs that I wanted this group to see. In this case, just the root level of Mobile World. If I wanted to add cascading permissions, I would need to check the box next to 33. Which is the total number of orgs within Mobile World. If I wanted to access just a specific department, I would need to expand Mobile World, select something like Financial, and click Add. I would then select Done and save, but in this case I'll just select Cancel. The next thing I'd like to show is how to add a group. To do that, I need to click the Add button in the top middle. I'll then enter a group name like Training, select a group type, in this case I'll select Interactive Users, and then select Advanced to confirm the appropriate permissions. Since View All Organizations is set, I don't need to adjust anything in Organization, so I'll go ahead and select Cancel. I could then add a member to this group by clicking in the box and selecting a person like D. To save the group, I would click Save in the bottom right. but in this case I'll just click cancel. I can also copy a group. To copy a group, I would click on the desired group, maybe view only, and select copy at the bottom. I can then rename the new group and select those things I want to include with the copy. I'll choose to include the group members, admins, org permissions, and dataset permissions. I'll make note of the fact that advanced permissions will be copied automatically. With that said, I'll now click Copy and Edit. The original group members and admins have carried across since I chose to include them. If I select Organization, Mobile World has carried over since I chose to copy org permissions. If I click Cancel in Advanced, the one thing that carries over automatically, as per the note earlier, are the permissions shown here. However, I do have the ability to manually change them. After making a change, I would then click Done, but in this case, I'll just click Cancel. To delete a group, I need to click on the desired group, maybe View Only Copy, then select Delete and confirm the deletion. One more item I'd like to show with groups is the ability to edit them by organization. Up at the top, I'll select by organization. I can then select any segment of the org hierarchy like Mobile World. In the top right, I'll click on Direct Permission and can now see which groups were granted direct permissions to it. In this case, Update Users and View Only. Notice that the Power Users and Interactive Users groups are not listed. However, if I select Can View All Organizations, I'll see those two groups. Even though I didn't manually take the time to grant those groups access to the org, they automatically have access to it due to the View All Organizations permission. I'll now minimize those two sections. Lastly, for cascading permission, there are no groups shown, meaning that no permissions cascade down from a higher level. However, if I click on Financial, I'll see one group with cascading permissions, meaning that permissions were granted at a parent level, Mobile World, and cascaded down to this level. I see that once again the Power Users and Interactive Users groups are not listed, but have access to the org due to the View All Organization permission. The last item to note is that group permissions are also editable from this option. If I select Mobile World and expand Direct Permission, I can change whether permissions cascade or I can edit the group. Next to View Only, I could click Delete to remove access to the group from this org. However, I'll just select Cancel. With that, I'll move on to Users by selecting Users under Users and Groups. From here, I see all the users that have been added to my environment: Dee, Don, Frank, and Tom. If I click on a user like Frank, I can see which groups that person has been assigned to and whether they are admin of any groups. To add a user, I have two options. To add them manually, I would click the plus or the add icon. I then need to enter a username, email address, first and last name, a password, and confirm the password. If I want to force the user to change their password the first time that they log in, I can leave this box checked. If I want to disable them, I can check this box, or I can set a date of expiry. I can also add them to groups at this time, but for now I'll move on to importing users. I'll select the import icon up at the top middle and get presented with a list of instructions that I should follow very carefully, especially if I'm including existing users. To show how this works, I'll select Download Example. I'll then open that file in Excel. I'll increase the zoom, expand all columns, and delete the last two rows. The username, first name, last name, email, and password columns are all required. I'll edit this for the person I want to add. For the sake of time, I'll just update the username, first name, last name, and email. And I'll make that Jason M. First name of Jason, last name of M, an email address, and I'll leave the password as is. The middle name column is not required, so I'll leave that blank. The group key column is not required, but it allows me to import a user to an existing group. The title column is also not required. Furthermore, it should only be used if titles have been configured in the system. To determine the group ID, I'll go to my second tab in Spider Impact. I'll then select Administration, and select Groups, and select Power Users. In the top right, I can see the ID for that group, in this case 5004. To determine what titles have been configured, I'll select Application Administration, and then scroll to the bottom. I'll see under User Titles, the valid entries in my system are Mr. and Ms. I'll go back to Excel, and if I wanted to import Jason automatically to the Power Users group, I would type 5004 for the group key. For title, I would have to type in Mr. or Ms, in this case Mr. for Jason, with the period. I also have the option to just leave the cell blank, and I'll actually do that, and I'll just delete that entry. With that, I'll click Save, go back to my first tab, and I'll select the file that I was just working with. I'll click on it and select Open. Confirm that import looks okay, with just the one row for Jason, and then select Import. I'll confirm the import finished successfully and select Done. If I select Jason, I'll see all his credentials have carried over from the import, including the Power Users group. Note that if I included an existing user like Tom in that import and set a password, he would be required to log in with that password and be asked to change it. If I left the password blank, he would be able to keep his existing one and not be prompted to change it. Also note that as my list of users grow beyond a certain limit, this list will disappear and be replaced with a display that shows how many users are in the system and advising me to search or filter to find a user. In the Find box, I could just type a user's name like Frank. To get more granular, I could select the filter icon and search by just a portion of the name, like the last name. However, I'll just restore the full list of users by clearing the box. The next thing I'd like to show is the ability of an administrator to log in as another user to troubleshoot permissions, set up bookmarks and alerts for them, etc. To be able to do that, a user requires a certain permission. To show where that is, I'll go to Groups, select Power Users, and then Advanced. On the right under Administration is the Login as Other Users permission. I'll now select Cancel. Since Frank and Jason are part of that group, they both have the Login as option available to them. Thankfully, I'm logged in as Frank, so I'll go back to Users and select Jason. In the top right, I'll select the Login as option. I get prompted with a warning that everything I do will be recorded as myself, but I will be editing things like bookmarks and alerts for Jason. Since I'm okay with that, I'll select Login. At the top, notice a clear warning that I'm now logged in as Jason. I see this user has no alerts and no responsibilities since I just added him to the system during the import. I could set bookmarks and alerts for him, but I'll leave that alone. I'll select Scorecards. I'll click on the Demos org and choose Select. I'll expand Examples and log in as another user and select Training Revenue. I'll then select Edit. I'll now illustrate the fact that all changes I make logged in as Jason still get tied to Frank. I'll change the data type from number to currency, select Save, and then click Done. If I then select History in the top right and select all events, notice how the data type change shows as Frank making the change instead of Jason. With that looking as expected, I'll select Close and then select Log Out as Jason in the top right.